The first time I saw Grant Holloway lose control of his face, he was standing under a 40-foot banner that said Honor, Surface, Legacy. My father had paid nearly $20,000 to hang that thing across the main distribution floor of Mercer Freight for the company's 30th anniversary gala. 300 guests were drinking bourbon from crystal glasses between rows of polished semi-trucks, while a jazz trio played where forklift operators usually loaded pallets. And there I was, 11 years after my father told me I had thrown my life away, walking through the center of it in my Army service uniform, with a sealed case folder tucked beneath my arm. My father saw me first. His smile disappeared. My sister Natalie turned around beside him, and the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't family walking into a family celebration. I was a problem she wanted removed before the donors, bankers, and city council members noticed me. Then Grant looked at me. For half a second he was still the charming former lieutenant colonel everyone in that room admired. Then his eyes dropped to the folder, and something changed. Not much, just enough. His jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffened, his right hand stopped halfway to his champagne glass. People who lie for a living learn how to control almost everything. Almost. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 11 years earlier, I was 20 years old, standing in the kitchen of the same house where I'd grown up outside Dayton, Ohio, holding an Army enlistment packet in one hand and trying not to let the other one shake. My father, Douglas Mercer, had built Mercer Freight from 2 used box trucks, a rented warehouse, and the kind of stubbornness that makes a man believe every person around him should want exactly what he wants. Growing up, I heard the story at least once a week, how he ate gas station hot dogs for dinner because he couldn't afford restaurants, how he slept in the cab of truck number 3 during his first winter, how he missed Thanksgiving in 1998 because a shipment had to reach Pittsburgh by morning. I respected what he built. What I didn't understand back then was that somewhere along the way, Dad stopped seeing the business as something he had created and started seeing it as something his children owed him. Natalie understood the assignment. She was 2 years younger than me, good with numbers, good with people, and even better at knowing exactly what Dad wanted to hear. By 19, she was talking about supply chain optimization at Sunday dinner. By 22, Dad already had a corner office picked out for her. Me? I wanted the Army, not because I hated the family business, not because I was running from responsibility. I wanted a life where I could find out who I was when my last name didn't open the door first. Dad stared at the enlistment packet like I had placed a dead animal on his kitchen counter. You're serious? Yes. You turned down the business program at Wright State for this? I deferred it. And yes. He laughed once. There was nothing funny in it. Rachel, people join the Army when they don't have options. You have options. That sentence stayed with me for years. Not because it was the cruelest thing he said that night, because he believed it. I tried to explain that I wanted structure, responsibility, service. I told him I wanted to earn something that couldn't be handed to me because my father owned a company. That made it worse. So now everything I built embarrasses you? That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said. Natalie was sitting at the breakfast island wearing an Ohio State sweatshirt, scrolling through emails about an internship Dad had arranged for her. She didn't say anything at first. Then Dad pointed toward her. Your sister understands what family means. Natalie looked up. For 1 second, I thought she might defend me. Instead, she said quietly, You always have to make everything harder than it needs to be, Rachel. That hurt more than Dad yelling. Dad walked into the mudroom, grabbed the canvas duffel I had packed upstairs, and dropped it onto the driveway outside. If you sign those papers, don't come back 6 months from now because you figured out real life is harder than a recruiting commercial. My throat burned. I remember staring at the Mercer Freight logo embroidered on his work jacket and thinking how strange it was that a man could build a company by taking a risk everyone called stupid, then punish his daughter for doing the same thing. I signed anyway. I wish I could tell you I walked away feeling strong. I didn't. I made it about 3 miles before I pulled into a Speedway parking lot and cried so hard I couldn't see the steering wheel. That was where Earl Jackson found me. Earl had driven for my father for almost 15 years. He was buying coffee before an overnight run to St. Louis when he recognized my car. He didn't ask what happened. He saw the duffel in the back seat and figured out enough. He leaned against my open window and said, "Your dad built his life by ignoring people who told him what he couldn't do. Funny how successful folks forget that lesson when it's their own kids." Then he handed me a paper cup of coffee. "Go build yours." I never forgot that. 11 years later, Aunt Denise mailed me a program for Mercer Freight's anniversary gala. On the front was Natalie beside her fiancé, Grant Holloway. The caption called him a decorated former Army lieutenant colonel and defense procurement executive. I almost tossed it aside. Then I noticed his uniform. I zoomed in. Once. Twice. My stomach tightened. One decoration didn't match the service history he claimed. An insignia belonged to a career field that made no sense with the story printed beneath his photograph. And a third detail was so basic that no officer with the career he claimed would have gotten it wrong. I sat there staring at the picture. I had spent 11 years being told I had chosen the wrong life. Now that life was telling me something my family couldn't see. Grant Holloway was lying. The only question was how much. I didn't call Natalie. I didn't call Dad either. Part of me wanted to. I wanted to hear one of them laugh and tell me I was being dramatic, because that would have been easier than admitting the man they had welcomed into the family might be lying about the one thing I knew better than almost anyone else in that room. But 11 years in the Army had taught me something my 20-year-old self didn't understand yet. When something feels wrong, emotion is the worst place to start. You start with facts. The Army hadn't turned me into some fearless machine. That's not how it works. I had been scared plenty of times. I had been exhausted, lonely, angry, and so homesick during my first year that I once sat on the edge of my bunk eating a vending machine Pop-Tart on Thanksgiving night because everybody else had somebody to call. What the Army gave me was discipline when feelings got loud. I learned how to keep my voice steady when someone across a table was lying to my face. I learned how to read timelines, compare statements, notice what changed between version 1 and version 3. Eventually, I moved into work involving military criminal investigations, where tiny inconsistencies mattered. A date off by 2 days, a signature that leaned differently, a soldier insisting he had never entered a supply cage when the access log said otherwise. None of it looked dramatic by itself. Put enough small things together, though, and a story started telling on itself. I remembered one case early in my career involving missing equipment from a stateside installation. Everybody had already decided a young private was responsible because he had debt, a temper, and a disciplinary record. He looked guilty enough that people stopped looking. I didn't. A civilian warehouse supervisor had been changing inventory codes and blaming shortages on soldiers who were easy to dislike. The private wasn't innocent of everything in life, but he was innocent of that. My supervisor told me afterward, "Mercer never confused an easy answer with the right one." I carried that sentence with me. So when I looked at Grant Holloway's picture, I forced myself to do the same thing. Maybe the magazine had mislabeled something. Maybe the photograph had been staged badly. Maybe a uniformed consultant had made a mistake. I gave him every reasonable explanation before I gave myself permission to suspect fraud. Then the explanations started running out. Aunt Denise had included several pages from the Gala program. Grant's biography claimed he had spent 20 years in the Army, including command assignments overseas, before retiring as a lieutenant colonel and founding Holloway Strategic Solutions, a defense procurement consulting firm based in Northern Virginia. The company supposedly connected mid-sized American manufacturers with federal contracts. According to the glossy profile, Grant had helped secure more than $80 million in government work. That number bothered me. Not because it was impossible, because men who had really done that kind of work usually left a trail. Corporate filings, contract announcements, industry panels, federal award records, something. Grant Holloway had almost nothing before 4 years earlier. I didn't have the authority to go digging through restricted systems because my sister had bad taste in men, and I wasn't about to cross that line. So I documented the discrepancies and passed them through the proper channel to someone I trusted, Special Agent Marcus Bell, a federal investigator I had worked beside on a procurement case the year before. Marcus called me the next afternoon. "You sitting down? That's never a good opening." He didn't laugh. "Your guy's weird." "My guy?" "Fine. Your sister's guy." According to Marcus, Holloway Strategic Solutions existed, technically. It had an office address in Virginia that turned out to be a rented mailbox inside a shared business center. Its website listed projects that couldn't be independently verified. Two supposedly senior employees appeared to have no professional history before joining the company. Then Marcus found something stranger. A signature on one of Grant's corporate filings matched a signature from an old military fraud case under a different name. Derek Sloan. The name meant nothing to me at first. Then Marcus sent over the publicly releasable records. Former Army logistics specialist, dishonorably discharged years earlier after an investigation involving falsified shipping records and theft tied to government inventory. My stomach dropped. Grant hadn't invented a military background from nothing. He had taken pieces of his real service, upgraded the rank, polished away the disgrace, and rebuilt himself into the exact kind of man my father would trust without asking hard questions. That was what made him dangerous. A completely fake story falls apart quickly. A story built around 10% truth can survive for years. Over the next several days, things moved beyond a family problem. Marcus connected Derek Sloan to two procurement companies that had collapsed after taking advance payments from regional manufacturers. One owner in Indiana had lost nearly $300,000. Another company in Kentucky had spent months fighting a federal audit after documents submitted in its name turned out to be fraudulent. Then Mercer Freight appeared. Dad had been telling local business reporters that Grant was helping the company enter the defense logistics market. Natalie, now CFO, had proudly announced they were preparing for the largest strategic expansion in company history. I stared at those words on my phone and felt something I hadn't felt toward my family in years. Fear, not for Dad's pride, not for Natalie's reputation, for the people whose names nobody put in magazine articles. Earl Jackson had retired by then, but dozens of drivers like him still worked there. Dispatchers with mortgages, mechanics sending kids to community college, warehouse workers who coached Little League after their shifts, people who had spent 20 years building Mercer Freight while my father talked about legacy from a stage. If Grant was doing what Marcus suspected, those people could lose everything because my family wanted to believe the right man had finally walked through the door. Then, 2 nights before the gala, Marcus called again. This time his voice was different. "We found the agreement." "What agreement?" "The partnership your father plans to sign Saturday night." I stood up from my kitchen table. Buried inside the financing package was an escrow provision tied to company assets and a personal guarantee authorized through Natalie's office. Once executed, Grant's firm would gain temporary control over funds and collateral connected to Mercer Freight's expansion. How much? Enough to sink the company if it disappears. I looked at the gala invitation beside me. Saturday, 9 p.m., public signing. Marcus went quiet for a second before saying, "Rachel, if your father puts his name on that contract, this stops being a bad decision. It becomes a disaster." For 11 years, Dad had believed I had walked away from the family business. The truth was, I might be the only person left who could keep someone else from stealing it. By 8:30 Saturday night, the main distribution floor of Mercer Freight didn't look anything like the place I remembered from childhood. The loading bays had been hidden behind black curtains. Forklifts were gone. Round tables covered in white linen filled the concrete floor where my father used to walk around in steel-toe boots, yelling about damaged pallets. Somebody had strung warm lights between the rafters. A local jazz trio was playing near Dock 7, and a bartender was pouring bourbon that probably cost more per bottle than Dad paid himself during his first year in business. At the far end of the warehouse, directly above the stage, hung that massive banner, Honor. Surface. Legacy. I almost laughed when I saw it. Almost. Marcus had told me to keep my phone on, stay calm, and let the federal team handle the arrest if things moved that far. My job was simple. Stop the agreement from being signed and put enough verified evidence in front of my family that they couldn't pretend this was some personal grudge. That sounded easy when he said it. It felt different when I stepped through the entrance and saw people I had known since I was a kid. Men who used to let me sit in the cab of their trucks when Dad brought me to work on Saturdays. Women from dispatch who remembered Natalie and me selling Girl Scout cookies in the break room. Some recognized me immediately. Some stared at my uniform and whispered. One older driver named Ray Collins actually smiled and gave me a small salute before catching himself. "Rachel Mercer," he said. Well, I'll be damned. That tiny bit of warmth almost broke me more than Dad's anger ever could. Then I saw my family. Dad was on stage holding a microphone, wearing a tuxedo that looked expensive enough to have its own insurance policy. Natalie stood beside him in a dark green evening dress, her left hand resting proudly on Grant's arm. Grant looked exactly like the version of himself he had sold to them. Calm, polished, military posture, silver hair at the temples, just enough humility in his smile to make wealthy people trust him. Behind them sat a table with a partnership agreement already laid out beside two engraved pens. Dad was halfway through a speech about bringing Mercer Freight into a new era of American defense logistics when his eyes found me near the back of the room. He stopped talking. For maybe 2 seconds, nobody understood why. Then Natalie followed his stare. Her expression changed from confusion to embarrassment, so quickly I could almost see the thought forming in her head. Not tonight. Dad lowered the microphone. "Excuse me," he said to the crowd, then stepped off the stage. He didn't walk toward me like a father who hadn't seen his daughter in 11 years. He walked toward me like I was a fire alarm going off during a sales presentation. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low at first, but people nearby had already gone quiet. "I need to speak with you before you sign anything." Natalie hurried over behind him. "Rachel, are you serious? Tonight? Especially tonight." Dad glanced at my uniform and his mouth tightened. "You show up after 11 years dressed like this, in front of my employees and business partners, and you think you get to tell me how to run my company?" I felt that old pressure in my chest. The 20-year-old version of me was still in there somewhere, standing in his kitchen with an enlistment packet while he explained why my choices made me a disappointment. But she wasn't running the conversation anymore. "Dad, don't sign the agreement." His face went red. 11 years, he said. 11 years, and you still chose a uniform over a future. And now you come back here to ruin the biggest night this company has ever had? That one landed. I won't pretend it didn't. Before I could answer, Grant stepped forward. "Douglas," he said smoothly, placing one hand on my father's shoulder. "Let me handle this." The confidence in his voice almost impressed me. Almost. He looked at my rank, then directly into my eyes. "Staff Sergeant Mercer, correct?" "That's right. Well, Sergeant, this is a private corporate event. Whatever family disagreement brought you here, I suggest you deal with it somewhere else." Natalie folded her arms. "Thank you," Grant continued, just a little louder now that people were watching. "And as a former officer, I'll give you some professional advice. Know your lane." There it was. That fake authority. That little performance. I could have opened the folder right then. Instead, I asked, "You were with the 82nd during your second deployment, right?" He blinked. "Yes." "Which brigade?" The room got quieter. Grant gave a short laugh. "I'm not sure what game you think you're playing." "No game. Your Gala biography says you commanded with the 82nd during your second deployment." "Which brigade?" He named one. Wrong. Not just slightly wrong. Wrong in a way someone with the career he claimed would not have been. I saw Marcus's lesson flash through my head. Never confuse an easy answer with the right one. Grant's jaw tightened. I pointed gently toward the framed photograph of him displayed beside the stage. "And the ribbon you're wearing in that photo? You told the Dayton Business Journal it came from the same deployment." Dad snapped. "Rachel, enough!" Grant tried to smile. I looked directly at him. "That ribbon wasn't authorized until after the year you claim you earned it." The smile disappeared. Natalie looked from me to him. "Grant?" He ignored her. Instead, he stepped closer to me. "You need to leave." "No!" His voice dropped. "I'm giving you a direct order." I actually smiled at that. "A direct order?" He puffed his chest just slightly, as if muscle memory from whatever small piece of real military service remained underneath the costume. "You're a staff sergeant trying to publicly challenge a lieutenant colonel. Think very carefully about how that looks." I reached under my arm and pulled out the folder. "That might matter if you were a lieutenant colonel." Something moved behind his eyes. Fear. I opened the folder. "But you're not Grant Holloway, are you?" No one moved. I watched the blood drain slowly from his face. "Your name is Derek Sloan," Natalie whispered. "What?" Grant stared at me. Dad shook his head. "This is ridiculous." I handed him the first document. Dishonorable discharge. Falsified shipping records. theft involving government inventory. That's the actual military career of the man standing next to you. Dad didn't take it at first, so Aunt Denise, who had quietly moved closer through the crowd, took the page from my hand and placed it directly against his chest. "Douglas," she said, "read it, that mattered, because for once somebody in the family wasn't asking me to prove I belonged there. She was asking him to listen." Dad read. His face changed. Grant spoke quickly. "Those records are being misrepresented. I can explain all of this." "Great," I said. "Explain the company." I handed Natalie the second packet. Holloway Strategic Solutions is registered to a mailbox in Virginia. 2 of the contracts on its website never existed. The third belongs to a company that has never heard of him. Natalie's hands started trembling. "No. I reviewed the financials. You reviewed what he gave you." Grant turned toward her. "Natalie, don't listen to this," I continued before he could regain control. "The personal guarantee you signed last month? It exposes you for $720,000 if the expansion financing fails." She went completely still. Dad looked at her. "What guarantee?" Natalie's voice barely came out. "Grant said it was temporary." Grant reached for her arm. She pulled away. That was the first moment I knew the spell was breaking. I placed the last document on the signing table. "And this is the escrow agreement scheduled to take effect tonight. Once Dad signs, your company gets temporary authority over funds tied to Mercer Freight's assets." Dad stared at me. "You couldn't possibly know that." I told him the account number. Not all of it, just the last 4 digits. His face turned gray, because only 3 people were supposed to know it. Dad, Natalie, and Grant. Grant looked toward the side exit. I saw it. So did Marcus. 2 men in dark suits stepped out from beside the loading office doors. Grant took 1 step backward, then another. Marcus raised his badge. "Derek Sloan, federal agent. Don't move." The entire warehouse seemed to inhale at once. Natalie covered her mouth. Dad stood beneath a banner about honor and legacy, holding proof that the man he had trusted with both had lied about nearly everything. Grant ran anyway. He made it maybe 12 feet before a second agent blocked the aisle between 2 banquet tables. A chair tipped over. Somebody screamed. Glass shattered against the concrete. Within seconds, Grant was against the side of a parked company truck, with his hands being cuffed behind his back. The same man who had just told me to know my lane was suddenly begging federal agents to let him explain, and I felt something strange. Not joy, not revenge. Relief, because I had spent 11 years imagining what it might feel like if my father finally understood that he had been wrong about me. Turns out I didn't need him to say it. I looked at him standing there with the evidence shaking in his hands. Then I looked up at the banner. "That uniform you were ashamed of," I said quietly, "taught me how to see what you refused to see." For the first time in my life, my father had nothing to say. After the agents drove away with Derek Sloan, the warehouse didn't suddenly feel like a victory scene. That's the part people usually leave out. The music had stopped. Half the guests had already slipped out through the side doors, probably because nobody wanted to be photographed standing near a federal arrest. The expensive bourbon was still lined up behind the bar. Plates of untouched food sat under heat lamps. One of the banquet chairs was still lying on its side where Grant had tried to run. Above all of it, that giant banner still hung from the rafters. Honor, Surface, Legacy. It looked ridiculous now. Natalie was sitting at one of the tables with her shoes off, staring at the personal guarantee in her hands. Her mascara had run, but she didn't seem to notice. Dad stood near the stage, still holding the unsigned partnership agreement. He had spent his entire adult life being the man in the room who knew what to do next. For the first time, he looked old, not weak, just human. $720,000, Natalie finally said. Her voice sounded small. I nodded. She looked up at me. "I signed that." "Yes, I thought it was standard. I know." "No, you don't." She stood so fast the chair scraped across the concrete. "You don't understand. He had attorneys, presentations, references. Dad trusted him. Everyone trusted him." That last part told me where her mind was going. She wanted the crowd to carry some of the blame. I understood why. Shame makes people reach for company. "Natalie," I said, "a lot of people believed him. But you were the CFO." Her face hardened. "There it is." "What?" "You finally get to say it. You finally get to stand there and tell me I'm the failure." I stared at her, and I realized something sad. For 11 years she had assumed I was keeping score, because she had been raised in a family where everybody kept score. I don't want your position, I said. She laughed bitterly. Right. I never did. That shut her up. I walked closer and lowered my voice. You weren't stupid. He was good at this. But you ignored things because he looked like the kind of man Dad had spent your whole life teaching you to trust. Nice suit, military title, federal contacts, country club manners. You didn't just fall for Grant, you fell for the resume. Natalie looked down. That hurt her. I could tell. But some truths hurt because they're cruel. Others hurt because they're accurate. Dad finally spoke from behind us. This is my fault. Natalie turned toward him. I did too. He placed the contract on the table like it weighed 50 pounds. I pushed this deal. Neither of us said anything. He rubbed both hands over his face. I wanted it too badly. That might not sound like much, but if you knew Douglas Mercer, it was almost unbelievable. My father apologized the way some men donate blood. Only when the situation becomes life-threatening. He looked at me. Rachel, I already knew what was coming. I was wrong. My chest tightened. There it was, the sentence I had imagined hearing at 21. At 24, at 27. Some nights overseas, when I was exhausted and angry and too proud to admit I missed home, I used to picture Dad saying exactly those words. I thought hearing them would fix something. It didn't. It felt good. I'm not going to lie about that. But it didn't give me back 11 Christmases. It didn't erase birthdays he never called on. It didn't undo the night he made me believe choosing my own future meant losing my family. Dad took a step toward me. Come home. I looked at him. He continued quickly, almost desperate now. We'll fix this. You can take a role in the company. Equity, whatever you want. We should have done that years ago. And there it was again. Dad trying to repair an emotional wound with a business arrangement. I almost smiled. Dad, I don't want a title at Mercer Freight. His face fell. I want my daughter back. You don't get her back because you finally realized she was valuable. He flinched. Natalie started crying again. I hated seeing it. That was the complicated part. I still loved them. You can love people and still know they're bad for you in the form they currently exist. I'm not saying never, I told him. I'm saying you don't get to skip the middle. What does that mean? It means an apology is a beginning. It's not a reset button. Dad looked down. I continued. If you want a relationship with me, then build one. Don't buy one. Don't offer me stock. Don't tell your golf buddies how proud you suddenly are. Call me when there's nothing you need. He nodded slowly. Over the next few weeks, the consequences kept coming. Mercer Freight had to open its books to investigators. Contracts were reviewed. Vendors were re-verified. Natalie temporarily stepped down as CFO and cooperated fully with the federal inquiry. She hated that decision, but she made it herself. Dad sold the restored 1967 Corvette he had spent 12 years bragging about. He used the money to create an emergency legal and payroll reserve for employees affected by the investigation. When Aunt Denise told me, I didn't know what to think. A year earlier, Dad would have protected that car before admitting he needed help. Now he was selling it to protect people whose names weren't Mercer. Maybe people can change. But I had learned something by then. You don't measure change by what somebody says when their world falls apart. You measure it by what they keep doing after the audience goes home. About 8 months later, Mercer Freight was still standing. That might sound like a small thing, but for a while nobody knew if it would be. The federal investigation cleared the company of intentionally participating in Derek Sloan's fraud, but the damage was real. Contracts had to be reviewed. Insurance rates went up. A few clients walked away because they didn't want their names anywhere near an investigation. Dad spent months meeting with employees face-to-face instead of hiding behind attorneys and press statements. That was new for him. So was the lobby. For most of my childhood, the front entrance of Mercer Freight had been covered with photographs of Dad, shaking hands with politicians, business awards, golf tournament trophies, and newspaper clippings about expansion deals. The next time I visited, most of them were gone. In their place was a plain sign announcing a new apprenticeship program for veterans transitioning into civilian logistics work. Dad never told me he was creating it. I heard about it from Earl. That mattered more than if Dad had named the program after me. He wasn't performing an apology anymore. He was trying to become a different man when nobody was watching. Natalie changed too, though not overnight. She spent months rebuilding the company's compliance system before returning to a finance role with less authority than she had before. A year earlier, that would have destroyed her. Now, she told me, turns out being the golden child is exhausting when you finally realize you were auditioning the whole time. That was probably the most honest thing she had ever said to me. We weren't suddenly best friends. Healing isn't a Hallmark movie. Sometimes we had coffee. Sometimes we argued. Sometimes one of us said something that reopened an old wound, and we had to stop pretending 11 years could disappear because we both wanted them to. Dad and I were even slower. The first few times he called, I expected him to ask me for something. He didn't. One Sunday he called just to tell me the Bengals had blown another game and complain about a bad holding call. We talked for 9 minutes. It was one of the best conversations we had ever had because neither of us tried to fix the past. Then, before hanging up, he asked, "How's work?" Not when was I leaving the army. Not whether I had thought about joining the company. Just how's work. I sat there for a second before answering. "I'm good, Dad," and I meant it. A few months later, I was speaking to a group of young soldiers during a mentorship session. One of them stayed behind afterward, 19 years old, nervous kid from Indiana. He told me his parents thought enlisting meant he had wasted his potential. For a second, I saw myself at 20, sitting in that Speedway parking lot, with tears running down my face, and Earl Jackson handing me bad coffee. So I told the kid what Earl told me, "Go build your life." Then I added something I had to learn for myself. The people who love you may not understand your path. Some of them may even punish you for taking it. But if you spend your life becoming who they approve of, one day you're going to wake up and realize the person you abandoned was yourself. He nodded. I hope he remembers it. I still have the old canvas duffel bag Dad dropped onto the driveway 11 years ago. The zipper barely works now. One strap is frayed. There's nothing special about it, but I keep it because it reminds me of the night I thought I was losing everything. I wasn't. I was leaving behind a life where my worth had already been decided for me. Dad once believed legacy meant putting the Mercer name on something big enough that people would remember it. I see it differently now. A family name can be inherited. Money can be inherited. A company can be inherited. Even a title can be printed on a business card. But character? That part you earn, every day, especially when nobody is applauding. And maybe forgiveness works the same way. I haven't forgotten what my family did. I don't think I'm supposed to. But I've stopped carrying the anger everywhere I go. That doesn't mean the past became acceptable. It means it stopped owning me. And after everything that happened, that might be the freedom I'm proudest of earning. Rachel's story reminds us that sometimes the hardest thing in life is not proving other people wrong. It is learning that we never needed their permission to become who we were meant to be. Many of us spend years carrying words spoken by parents, spouses, bosses, siblings, or friends who judged our choices before they understood them. Those words can stay with us longer than we want to admit. But time has a way of revealing character. Titles, money, polished appearances, and impressive resumes may open doors, but they cannot replace integrity. Rachel's father mistook prestige for worth, while the daughter he dismissed quietly built the discipline, judgment, and courage that eventually protected the very people who had rejected her. The deeper lesson is not that we should wait for the day our critics regret what they did. It is that we should keep building a life we can respect even if that day never comes. As the old saying goes, character is what you do when no one is watching. Forgiveness can be part of healing, but forgiveness does not require us to erase boundaries, excuse harmful behavior, or return to relationships that have not truly changed. Real reconciliation is built slowly through accountability, consistency, and action. And sometimes peace comes not from getting the apology we once wanted, but from realizing we no longer depend on it. If this story made you think about someone in your own life, or about a time when you had to choose self-respect over approval, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please give the video a like and subscribe for more dramatic, meaningful stories about courage, family, justice, and second chances. Wherever life finds you today, I hope the road ahead brings you a little more peace, a little more clarity, and the courage to keep walking toward the life that truly belongs to you.